You're recording.
All right, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Wanted to go over some of the issues of the discipline matrix that was originally approved by the 2019-2020 Cleveland Police Commission. Originally, the writing for that took place in 2018, the starting of that writing. And of course, we finally got to that point in 2019. Before you all is this article that that our great commissioner here was able to make a quote on. This is the reason why we're here today. It's because of the discipline that has been going on. Now, I feel obliged to go through a little bit of history here, if you would please allow me. As you all may know, but others may not, in 1973, the Black Shield filed a lawsuit against the city of Cleveland, federal lawsuit, stating that there were no minority officers. That lawsuit took 4 years to go through, all the way to the Supreme Court, to finally, in 1976 actually, they won. In 1977, you will find, when you go through the history of a lot of the old-time Cleveland police officers, you'll find that more than 90% of them came on after 1977 from that lawsuit, including the mayor's father. All of that being said, that lawsuit actually started the very first consent decree that we had here in Cleveland, which required the city of Cleveland to have at least 36% of its workforce minority. That means women, Hispanics, Asians, African Americans, what have you. Yes, sir.
City of Cleveland overall? Or
the city of Cleveland. That particular consent decree spread out to the surrounding suburbs. And it went on and on and on. So when you look at the makeup of a lot of the suburbs here in Cleveland, you'll find that a lot of that came from that consent decree. The reason why that's so important is because of the consent decree that we have now. The things that are going to happen here in this consent decree will have long-reaching effects, not just here in Cleveland, but also in these suburbs as well. It's going to change memorandums of understanding also. So we have to be very clear about what we're doing here, especially when it comes to discipline. Because as you can see from this article, we're losing a lot of officers, and all of it really is not about the just discipline, but a huge amount of it is. The ones who are leaving to go to other departments, they will tell you that it's about issue 24, it's about this thing, but it really isn't. It's about the application of discipline as they've known it to be. Now, I started in the Cleveland Division of Police in 1990. I can tell you that from 1990 to 2014, there was really no discipline policy. There were rules, and if you violated rules, or if you got put up on charges for those rules, you may have been disciplined, you may not have. There was no clear outcome for that. You didn't know. In 2014, there was the very first matrix. That matrix came about as a result of some issues that took place here in Cleveland to try and get ahead of what everyone knew was coming, which was going to be the Department of Justice doing their investigation, which they did and completed in 2015. So when you look through the history of the discipline here in Cleveland, you'll see 2014 was pretty much the very first matrix. It didn't work. The way it worked, it was basically allowing a lot of discretion, and they still couldn't show to people that what Kayla did or what Kayla got was the same thing what Ryan got for what Ryan did. They could not show that. So, fast forward 2 years to 2018. Oh, I'm sorry, 4 years to 2018. You had an updated matrix that the city called disciplinary guidance. And with that, they tried to show to the people that they were more about discipline and that the matrix was stronger than the last one. Some issues took place where an officer, how do you say it? The citizens wanted an officer terminated. When they looked at the matrix at that time, there was no way to terminate that person. So, on to 2019. They said, well, we're going to fix that loophole and we're going to bring in what's called the presumption of termination, which they thought then that would increase the discipline. All along, while they're doing this, no one's ever dealing with the issue at hand as to how to actually build corrective or how to correct bad behavior. We were all just looking at discipline. How do we punish officers? And actually, it should never have been about punishment, but yet it was. For decades and decades, it's only been about punishment. Fast forward to today, it looks like in 2020, the CPC actually submitted their version of the policy to the Division of Police. I'm sorry?
Well, no, we've given them a draft to respond to, but we haven't submitted it, voted on it all.
I was talking about 2020.
2020, oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you weren't here yet.
No, I was hearing 24 in my brain, yeah.
Okay.
You said
Yes.
today, you said something about today, so.
So yeah, in 2020 they submitted, it was rejected, and then they came with their response to it. The CPC then responded back ultimately, and then we got to in 2003, I believe, in November of 2003, the city, which you were here.
23.
I'm
23.
23.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2023. That's what I said, right?
No.
No?
But
Okay.
it's okay.
Sorry,
Right.
2023, yes. 2023, the city submitted their response to the CPC as to what they wanted, or their input rather. And so, as I look here now, there's been some collaboration back and forth with the city, and now I believe as of August 21st, 2024, the city has issued its latest recommendations.
See, I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, the the police department
To you guys.
to you
They
guys.
sent us in January, right?
So they sent us in January.
Yes.
Brian Carney gave us a new GPO. What
Mhm.
that GPO did was take a little bit of our past work, Richard,
Mm-hmm.
and put it in there, but gave no explanation for what they left out of our recommendations. So they took a few things
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah, I think
added
that-
it into a GPO, but they gave no matrix or crosswalk or anything
Right.
that says, here's the things that we accepted from your recommendations in 2020, and here's what we didn't, which is
So-
required under the consent decree that they give a crosswalk and
Hmm.
a written response to each thing. They never did
Understood.
that.
I
And then
think that-
we've gone through and made edits to the draft you guys received we've added things back in
Mhm.
from the model policy. Sorry. for
So,
cutting you off.
no, that was what I was gonna say, is we had a document that, had a date on it.
It had a
And so
date of
that's-
August
yeah,
21st,
I think that's-
2024.
I think it could have been when your last draft with each other
Yes.
internally.
Yes,
Whatever
okay.
it was,
Internal.
that document
That was why-
said.
That was your
That's
internal?
the date.
Okay.
So that's where that date
Okay,
came from.
yeah.
So
I
obviously,
think we're on the same
the
page.
bottom line is that you guys have been collaborating with the police department to make edits. They've made edits. You guys make edits back. And for that, I'm saying thank you. You guys actually gone through all of that process now, and now it's time to actually start building out from that process. There are questions that need to be answered. There are questions that still need to be asked. And we're here to do that. But to get to that point, I wanted to offer you this. To answer your questions to where you are now, we've prepared these for you for your consideration. What this is all of the recommendations or the consideration of the recommendations that the city has made to you all and what you all put back in and considered from the model policy. In looking at that policy from before that we did the model policy, I actually went back over it over and over again, and I saw that there were some things that I remember even back then where I thought we didn't go far enough. But the reason was back then we could only make recommendations, and we realized that we were going probably far further than the city even wanted us to. But here, there's a difference. And so, looking at what the union contracts say for both the FOP and the CPPA, looking at what the edits were from the law department, looking at what the police department offered, looking at what you guys put back in, this is the compromise between all of that. Well, not even so much a compromise. It's basically taking all of that and incorporating it into one. There are reasons for each one of the things that's done in there. Most significantly, you will see that the non-disciplinary corrective action I found was most needed. When you look back over the last year and even the year before that, of the number of cases that the police department heard for officer discipline, you'll find that a lot of them had to deal with a lot of these things that are currently in the non-disciplinary section. So rather than putting paperwork on these officers for that, there should be some way where they should be able to see, if I do this, this is what I will get, period. And that was the purpose of this. Now, we also used the manual of rules to come up with this. Yes, ma'am.
On what you've given us here, is there, are the changes highlighted or noted?
I actually have on my copy the highlighted changes, but
That would be
Oh,
helpful.
sorry, so, that doesn't work.
please.
Yeah, so we were kind of going through this and trying to, okay, to directly answer your question, I have a copy, a digital copy that has everything track changed.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because it would be hard for us to
Well,
go through.
so the other thing is that if it's, this is basically a new document, that incorporates things from both things. I put together, if necessary, later, whatever, I didn't make copies for everybody, but comparisons of, I put together two different documents. One is a comparison of this draft compared to the CDP's draft, and another is the 2020 draft compared to the CDP's input, or whatever, draft, whatever. And which highlights, like, basically, they're not identical sections, but basically highlights the differences. And like I said, I have a lot of stuff track changed. It's kind of confusing. And at a certain point I had to stop track changing because it was like too many changes. But the draft but I'm happy to share that at some point, the draft that I was track changing from was the 2020 draft. Yeah.
So not the draft we sent.
No, not the CDP's.
So this isn't based on what we sent, this is,
Yes,
It is.
oh,
Yes, it
Definitely is. I mean,
So-
yeah.
But you don't have a comparison of what they already worked on, so they have a working edit right now,
Right.
right?
Which we have right here.
We have that
But you
too.
guys didn't build off of that, you started
we-
something new.
Yes, actually we did. We did build off of that. We took what you put in the margins for your changes, and we actually incorporated those changes into this document, looking at what the police department put in, what you guys put in, and then we put it there in the one document
So
for
it's-
you.
Some of
And
our,
it's not just the stuff in the comments, we definitely
Good,
included stuff in the
because
body.
some of our work was already in the
Yeah,
main
yeah,
document.
no,
Okay.
Yes.
we included stuff from the body into this draft,
Good.
and also accounted for the things that were written in the margins,
Okay,
which
yeah,
are
awesome.
questions and comments and other things.
So,
We-
in
I
I was
short,
just trying to understand what it is.
I know, and it's not, obviously, there's no highlights, so it's not highlighted, but I did everything that I could to track the differences from both angles. Can I see one more time?
Okay, this is basically what happened. So we were going through, and we were going through it based off of the draft that you guys sent. And we didn't, I mean, a couple different issues were kind of at play. We did not have enough time to work from that draft for today. But it was not just really that. It was also that we realized that what we were trying to kind of do was it was going to be a much faster path to take the 2020 draft and implement the things that we thought were important from this draft into that one. It was like a much faster
Sure.
way to do it.
Yeah.
That's the reason for it. So I understand it kind of seems like we did not ignore this. We really didn't ignore it. And in fact, like that's why I tried to put together as much as I could of comparing different things to track all of that.
I would just like to make sure. I
Yeah.
understood. I
So,
wasn't, like-
so this is
Yeah.
closer to the 2020
Definitely,
as a pure, so that model policy, this looks
This is
more
closer
like
to the
that.
model,
Okay,
yes.
right.
We took nothing away that you guys had put in. We did take away from what the city had put in.
City put in, right.
Yeah, we
Although, to
We-
be fair,
gutted a lot of theirs.
Sure.
To be fair, if there are things that were in there, we had no way of distinguishing exactly what you guys did put in. So it is actually possible we did remove things from their draft. We wouldn't know that because there were things also that were in italics, things that weren't. I know it said at the top of that document, it said substantive changes by division are italicized. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't italicized that was different from this version, so I don't know which was which, but,
Oh, that's cool.
yeah.
So,
Can you use that?
does this one work?
Does that one work? The one across the table?
Yeah, yours is working.
Mine's the only one that works.
Yeah, mine's not.
Well, we can maybe put it between us and kind of, that one?
This one is, hello?
Why would that
This one's not
be-
working.
If need be, we'll
Whatever,
keep
we
handing
can-
this.
So-
whatever.
Anyway, in short, all the stuff that you had in the model policy is in this policy. A lot of the things that we believe that were from the city's policy were taken out.
Okay.
We tried to stop all the duplication of charges,
Yes.
which was the main thing,
Right.
being able to charge someone with the group 1, group 2, and group 3
That's
for the
what
same
we-
offense.
Yeah.
Those are our biggest.
Did you
some of
watch
our-
the meeting that they had, the last meeting on this?
Yes, I
That's
did
where-
watch it.
So that was the significant difference between our model policy, is they redundantly did things so that it gives a discretion to the chief or
Right.
the safety director to say, well, this is a 3 or this is a 1, because they're duplicating
Right.
offenses, and I was trying to explain to them, we eliminated all that, and every one of our, in the model was unique, right? There was very few, there were only like 2 that were redundant.
Now, there are some that have to be in 2 places at once, because there are some things that change by way of circumstance. Now, the one thing that we did here, which was, I'm really, really proud of, is that she took the position of a citizen, not having any knowledge of police, and actually what we're seeking for higher charges. I took the position of a police union member to try and say, no, we don't want the officers to get anything. That's not how I truly feel, but we were trying to look at this from the best, because the CPC is here not only for the citizens, but for the officers as well. So we're looking for the best situation from all of this, using what the union contracts say, and also what the new manual rules say from 2024. Yes,
There's a new manual rules from 24?
Well, it hasn't been
It's the same
adopted.
draft.
it's still a drop.
Okay,
drop.
no, but my one point, and this is not to defend the division, but if you remember from that meeting, what their argument was for having things in different places was because they can't move things up, but they can move them down.
That's not true.
That's what they said. just so
Yes,
you know.
I understand
Yeah,
that.
okay.
So the thing about charges when you're dealing with officers is that, to be quite honest, it's not, when you're a supervisor, it's not just about how many people you can put up on charges, because you have to know what happens on the other end of that too, what happens with those officers. And so everyone talks about trauma informed for the citizens, but you're not understanding what's happening with those officers on the street when they come into work and they realize there's only 4 or 5 people there at work because the rest of them are suspended. This sort of thing happens far too often, and what we're trying to do is correct bad behavior. We're trying to correct bad behavior. We're trying to teach what to do and what not to do. So, getting into that, there are a number of things in here that you're probably going to have questions to, and you're going to see some things that are highlighted. Those are the things where she and I got into differences as to where they should be.
Yeah, so, I just wanna also say, like, and Chandra, you weren't here when we sort of talked about this at the beginning, but I kinda wanna suggest that if you guys are able to, like, take notes of your questions, and then we can, like, have more of a discussion at the end, I wanna make sure that, like, when Richard explains stuff to me, it makes an enormous amount of sense and it answers a lot of my questions, when, you know, in kind of his path explaining. And I just want to make sure that he doesn't need me to say this, but just like have the ability to really kind of explain things, you know, in that way. And then we can get into like some of the differences, like, you know, you'll see at the beginning, it says like, I changed it to corrective action instead of, you know, whatever, everything's about corrective action. There are all sorts of things that are changed kind of in little ways that we can talk about, but I want to make sure that Richard's able to like fully explain this in the way that it was sort of intended as authored, and then we can get into like more questions if that's okay.
Right, and I'll be as succinct as possible, but one of the main things I would really like to bring your attention to are Group 1 violations. You'll see unauthorized and or knowingly improper vehicle pursuit. In that, we added the word knowingly, as you spoke about in your last meeting about this, and Director Goodrich brought up, the ORC does deal with the various culpable mental states. And as you know, knowingly is the second of the highest of those culpable mental states. We wanted to put that in here so that the department has to prove the knowingly part. The word intentional, I understand you want to take out because intentional is really, really hard to prove. You're right. But knowingly is one that is easier to prove, but yet still a high bar. We don't want to make it so easy where you say, you know, just recklessly or negligently. That negligent is the lowest of the culpable mental states, which is too easy. And I'm not trying to say that we're trying to let the officers off, but we really do want to get the bad behavior out of the police department. So with that, we put that in Group 1. And notice we put a caveat, excluding injury or serious damage to property. The reason for that is because when officers are out there working, sometimes you see a car that goes by and you've already heard the call for service about that car earlier. You have one option, well, two options. One, you can sit there and go and wait and see if you can get permission to go after that vehicle, which I don't know if you realize, but if you wait a few seconds, that vehicle is gone. Or you can go ahead and start up and let radio know to try and get permission while you're watching the vehicle so it doesn't get away. The thing here is that at that moment, when those officers do that, if they choose to go look, you know, keep their eye on that vehicle, some people will call that a pursuit. And at that point, if something happens and it's not approved at that moment to go after that particular vehicle, then those officers are now just in the wind. So we can't always assume that every officer is out there looking for an opportunity to get into a chase for that day, where they're putting on their hats to say, hey, how are we going to do a chase today? They probably don't even want to get into a chase, but they have a duty and they're sworn to take an oath. Well, they took an oath and they're saying, if they see this vehicle come by, they're going to have to do something. So that was the thing. But if they come into an injury, or I mean, if there is an injury or something happens, yes, there probably should need to be some sort of discipline for that. The other matter, Group 2, unauthorized and or knowingly improper vehicle pursuit, knowingly improper emergency driving resulting in injury or serious damage to property. We definitely thought that there should be something for that, but we do understand that there are circumstances when the officers are out there that they just don't have time to take into account all of the different things. So with that, I am going to let Kayla get into the rest of this one.
Okay, yeah, and I think that, I mean, just kind of on this, the reason why I'm saying zoom out is because I think that this is a little, I mean, we can get into any amount of specifics that we want to, but I think right now it's helpful to give like the context for this. So There are only a couple that are in all three groups, and they're specified as to why and in what circumstances. The one that you're just now talking about, obviously, there's a work group right now, and you guys are working on a policy. So as soon as, so I don't think it's necessarily worth spending an enormous amount of time discussing that, because you're going to end up with something else anyway, pretty soon. But we got to put something in here, certainly for now, that makes logical sense, that we all feel relatively comfortable with, because it's better than nothing. But it is, the point just generally, though, I think being, is that when there are multiples, it's specified. Like when there are repetitions between the groups, it's specified as to why. For example, first instance, second instance, whatever. And I think that in general, when we're thinking about this, and I really tried with this setup to not have like a bunch of stuff constantly repeated, because it's kind of confusing, and we want it to be as not confusing as possible for any number of reasons. But basically, the section where I'm kind of in between page 5 and 6, is I called it the framework section, is where the rule basically is unless otherwise stated, right? So unless otherwise stated, the matrix describes how sustained violations occurring in the same group. Yeah, I think it's probably fine to take off your jacket. So, within a 3-year period, automatically progresses the corrective action into the next higher group as follows. And, group 1, group 2, group 3, if there are 4 more violations, it moves to the next one, etc. And which is also then shown possibly more clearly on the very back, which is slightly duplicating things, I realize, but is sort of a different way of showing it, which is the chart that is the actual sort of actual matrix itself. Now, the point here being, and then I'll pass back to Richard, but basically the concept behind all of this is that this is what the rule is, and then there are potentially exceptions. And it's in those exceptions where things are specifically stated in the violations section, where it lists out the things that are definitely in those sections. And the violations list are not intended to be all-inclusive, which means that potentially things can be added, but they cannot be moved around. And that takes out that element of discretion. But that's generally, you may already understand that, but that's the concept of this matrix overall, is that things are not repeated unless the behavior is repeated and it's unless otherwise specified. And then the other thing I'll just say is that, there were things that we did not, we came to agreement on most things, but there's some things that we really kind of struggled with, and that are, obviously, there's a lot of stuff that is open for anybody's, viewpoint. So stuff to do with like the firearms and what groups some of that should go in is like, that's why that is in a different color. Richard.
So with that, I'm sure you guys have seen some of these that are highlighted. If you have any questions about those, you can just raise your hands and we'll get into that. But for now, it is vitally important that you understand the reason why we added certain things here. One, on page 1, as you can see, we put approved by the Community Police Commission at the top there. You're not actually approving it today, but ultimately, as you guys go forward and you start approving some of these GPOs, that should be there because it is in accordance with 115.5, so that everyone can see that it went through the entire process and no one skipped over you in it. Secondly, it is also important to realize that under Section 345 of the current consent decree, the Commission has the ability to review the discipline policy every year. So if you find something that you need to make corrections to, you can always do that, which is the reason why in 2018 they had one policy, and in 2019 they went to quite another, because they realized there were some holes in the first one. Here, you'll see it on page 2 of ours, page 10. Yeah, page 2.
Page 2 at the bottom.
Yeah, it's page 2 at the bottom. You should be in bold in there. That's extremely important. So if you find something that you want to go over next year, you have here. It's already there for you to do that. And that's pretty much.
Talk about the committee thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Fairness and consistency.
thanks.
On page
So,
10.
on the Fairness and Consistency Committee, in the original one that we did, I have to say that was one of the places where I myself, I did not feel comfortable with having CPRB there, even though we put them there. In this one, like I said, this is just our suggestion. In this one, taking it out. And the reason why is because the purpose of the Fairness Committee was to start to rebuild the culture within the police department. The officers themselves, let me put it this way, there's a belief that culture starts from the top down. That's a fallacy. It doesn't work like that. It actually goes from the bottom up. The officers themselves have to be accountable to one another. As officers are in a double-blind situation and they're only seeing the violations, then they're starting to understand that that's not cool. And when they're talking about it, what happens is, and this I'm sure you all know, the water cooler is the strongest, the most effective place to change culture. And that's what happens, is that the officers are talking with one another at these various organizations, and they are actually saying, that's not cool, they shouldn't be doing that. And that stuff spreads like wildfire. And the chief can make an order all day long. I'm gonna tell you, it might make it through 4 or 5 commanders and maybe down to a captain, and then it may stop there. A lieutenant might read it, but I tell you, the officers, they don't know it until they're brought up on charges for it. And we have no greater example of that than your old safety director who stood at the podium as the safety director says he didn't know half these rules. So if he doesn't know, how do you expect these officers to know it, really? So this is where they're going to learn all the things that they should do and what they shouldn't do, and it's happening at the organic level with these officers, and it's building all the way up to the top. So that was the important part about that. A lot of people didn't understand that, and we also in this one made another change, and this is an addition. We put that it should be used in every one of these charges. Every one of these charges. Before, it was put for only when the safety director or chief didn't hear the case. But no, it should be for every singular charge, because the only way to truly build the culture is to have all the facts. And once they have it and they're able to talk about it at the water cooler, they will start changing internally on their own. And that's how that's going to happen. Now, it is very important everybody understand about police reform. This is not like turning a speedboat. It's more like turning a barge. You need to understand that it's going to take some time for that to turn, but you will start to see the progress as long as you're turning the wheel. Here, we're turning the wheel, and this is where it starts. So, with that, I will take questions, but before that, I want everyone to understand and really give a warm welcome and applause to my teammate here, Kayla. I could not have done this without her. She stayed up to 3 o'clock in the morning to get a lot of this stuff done because we just didn't have enough time to work on this stuff. So, Kayla, thank you. I appreciate you. Thank you. So with that, I'll take any questions you have.
So starting where you left off with the Fairness and Consistency Committee, so we had we had added the PAT just because they didn't exist in 2020. So, and the pushback we got from the division on human resources was they're like, we can never get them to do anything. So it was sort of like, well, the PAT,
I'm sorry, what did human resources say?
they said that the division was basically saying that they,
I couldn't hear you. If you could speak into the mic, because I couldn't hear you.
that the division says that they can never get the city's human resources department to do anything. So having them in here was what we thought was we would put the police accountability team in there because that's their role. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's actually a bad. So the purpose of that fairness committee is to have it where it's just the officers. Basically, you have the Emerald Society, the Black Shield, Hispanic organization. They're all having a member in there, and their members are looking at that, and they're taking it back to their members. They don't know anything about that. Definitely no commanders, no of those other people. Now, as for the Human Resources Department, I did hear the argument that you can't get all of these people in the room together. Truth is, you don't need them in a room together. The information is sent via email, and they can put their stamp on it from there and get everything in that way. So they can see, they can each hear 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8 cases or whatever, put their statement on it, and then ultimately it will go, and I would think that the IG, whoever you guys hire to do that, will be the final person sending that through, because they're gonna need to be the ones to gather the data for, and be able to spot when there are problems in order to get the proper recommendations into the chief to fix them. Yes.
I just wanna make sure I'm understanding how this process works. So, the investigation happens,
Mhm.
there's a pre-disciplinary hearing, and then the hearing officer makes the recommendation to the chief of police or the director of public safety. And then that same recommendation is then sent to the fairness committee, the
Yes. Yes.
fairness and consistency committee.
Yes.
Now they look at it and they say, and you know, they don't have the individual details of who the officer is.
Correct.
But they are looking at the recommendation, and then they may either agree with that or submit an alternative recommendation.
So,
And,
good question. Absolutely. They're not submitting. So here's what they're doing. When that hearing comes down, actually, now there's some differences here. I prefer that before any discipline is imposed, that it goes to that committee. Others prefer to impose the discipline first. What I'm looking at is the trauma that these officers are having to go through by having unlawful, well, not unlawful, but unjustified and unfair treatment, and then having to, go through all that, then hoping that somewhere down the line they are made whole. That part, you've just basically ruined a new officer when you've done that. So I would prefer that happens first, but here's how that happens. When they get that and they make their they go through and they say, yeah, that was something that should not have gone through by the officer, or look, that's something that happens all the time. Since when has it been wrong? So that the supervisors and the command staff understand that things have been happening for a long time, and the reality of it is a lot of people have turned a blind eye to things, and then when the citizens see that something's wrong, then they want to put officers up on charges for it to say that it was never right. That is a lie, and I don't care who's looking at me when I say that. That is 100% bold-faced lie. I was on the job for 30 years, and I can tell you clearly that for certain people, they were turning a blind eye. So what we're trying to do is put it out there so that the command staff is on the same page as the officers, and that they all understand that either this is acceptable behavior or it is not.
So one thing you said I wanted to ask about, you said that, and I probably misunderstood, but you said that you would prefer that all discipline go through which committee before it's imposed?
The Fairness Committee, because in the original paperwork, in the original language, it stated that only the Fairness Committee would only view the cases that came from a hearing officer. However, if the chief or the safety director was the one hearing it, then it wouldn't go through them. I'm asking, and this is up for debate, I'm asking that all of it go through them so that everyone can be on the same page with what is supposed to be done and what isn't.
Right. So all of it goes through them, but it's all a review process. I misunderstood what you said. You made it sound, yeah.
Pete, one thing that we've learned in the hearing review process is DOJ will not approve this unless we put a timeline on it then. So
Oh, right.
we're gonna have to say, DOJ is like, anything in this process needs a timeline. We already got that back on our own hearing. So we'll have to say in time how long this committee has to make their recommendation back to the chief or the safety director. Also, you'll have to add in that second paragraph on the last page, it says that they'll provide their own recommendations to the chief. You'll have to also add or safety director, whoever's.
Yeah, that's additional language,
Yeah,
yes.
it's just a missing piece there. But you will have to decide then for this committee how much time they have. You know, you and
Originally-
I, both, Richard, you and I both know the only way this is gonna work is if they intercede before it is
Before discipline is imposed.
is imposed, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're gonna accept the recommendations, we still have to deal with that
course.
problem. They may say, nah, this committee is off, we're doing it our way.
Of
And-
course.
And that's only gonna help the officer later when it comes to CPC or to.
Or
goes to
arbitration.
Arbitration,
Right.
right, cause that's an issue for us, but,
So if I could go further with the Fairness Committee, the reason why we want the Human Resources Department in there is because over my time in the police department, I've noticed that there were a number of GPOs that were being followed by the police department that were never in line with what was actually at Human Resources. One of the cases was trying to report where there's a discrepancy or discrimination at work. The GPO previously at that time said that you had to go through the EEOC officer at the chief's office. To be quite honest, as a black male, how do you feel comfortable going to a white male that's sitting there saying that you're being discriminated against by your friend? It didn't work. I then went outside that GPO and went straight to Human Resources because I understood within the law of the city that I had the right to do that, and I did that. The city put me up on charges for it, but it had to be dismissed because they realized that I was actually following the rule, for which they ended up having to change that rule. There have been a number of other rules, sexual harassment and so on and so forth, that were changed because Human Resources says, no, police, you can't do it that way. You have to do it this way. So what we're trying to do is prevent some of the lawsuits that have come to the city by way of the officers not following Human Resources rules and say, look, Human Resources have a hand in this. Please let us know if we're doing it right so that we can reduce some of those lawsuits.
Yeah, I think I really love what you put in here for this. I think one thing I'm trying to think about is I think if they're doing every discipline, it would probably have to be a group that would meet monthly or semi-monthly.
So they don't really have to meet. That's the thing.
yeah.
They
They
have to come to consensus.
They get a batch of them in an email, and they can read them during their off time at work or however
So-
that happens.
And I, now that I'm hearing you say this out loud, I agree with you 100%, Richard. I think you need to put that in here, that one, the Inspector General owns this thing, right? So, because it's gonna be debated who has the authority to compel people to turn that work in, right? So you have to say, you said it, and I agree 100%. Put the Inspector General as in charge of this committee, not because they can compel them, but because they're responsible for making sure that things are turned in a timely way, and that an annual report, and they should put out an annual report on the consistency of discipline. That should be in here too.
And that would
So-
be one of the projects of the IG to begin with
Right,
anyway.
but I would put it, I would memorialize it in here that
Yeah.
says the IG runs this thing, right? And I would also put in here that they don't have to meet in person, that they can do this work, as it comes, right? So as soon as the hearing happens, within 10 days, everyone independently reviews it and turns in their opinion to the IG. The IG synthesizes it and gets it back to the chief. It's
Actually, in my mind, I actually was looking at a 14-day period.
14, whatever, that was a
That's
random
what
number,
I
but-
had in my mind, so that they can get them out. The other thing is that if this is operated properly, though a lot of those cases that we're currently seeing won't be happening because most of them are now in the non-discipline section, so that you can concentrate more on the more serious
Yeah, absolutely.
violations.
So it says that the recommendation is arrived via a consensus of the 5 members. So if the are you saying that then they would read them independently, send in their decision? If there was not a consensus, at that point, would you recommend that they need to discuss it? Or?
Well, that's going to be up to the IG, but the IG will be collecting what those numbers are. And if the IG sees that all of the officers voted in a block, for instance, the IG can then ask those officers for further information as to why, what's going on with that, so that they can then look further into it, because that's going to be one of the functions of the IG anyway, to find where there are problems in the system.
And so you guys did the 2018 analysis, but we already were looking at other years too, right? once you start looking at these, Chandra, you'll see it's not hard to see immediately when they
Yeah.
deviated, right? Like the things that we've already flagged. Something was supposed to be presumption of termination, but it wasn't. But easy to flag. I don't think you're going to have a lot of times if they're using this matrix, right? Where they're going to, they should be able to look at it and say, yeah, they should only really need to even look at this and say what was they found guilty of. They're not re-adjudicating the facts and say, is it here? Where they'll have a problem is if it's supposed to be here and it's here, then they'll send it back and say no. So their job should be relatively easy under this matrix. It would be really hard right now under the 2019 matrix because it's too subjective, right?
This is the 2019 matrix right
Yeah,
here.
yeah, it doesn't have these rules of the road, but you guys are putting in such good rules of the road if you adopt this, that the Fairness and Consistency Committee should just really be looking for egregious violations by the chief or the safety director of going outside the matrix, right?
Yes, and the reason why I'm asking such specific questions about this is because I'm imagining us going to the division, and I think that they're going to ask us operational questions like when would they meet, how would this work, and so that's why I'm trying to understand what y'all's intention was.
Absolutely, I understand that.
Yeah.
So
So
please,
it's not
you-
an attack. It's just
so no,
should
no,
flesh it out.
you're
Yeah.
actually free to put down my 14 days that I was thinking about in my mind, because as soon as they get it, they can get the email of the groups that they heard that day, which normally they hear about 5 to 10 cases, and those can get right over to them, and it's very easy for the officers to look and say, okay, yeah, that one, and it says here, 1 day. Yeah, they're supposed to get 1 day for that. That one says 2 days. Then they're supposed to get 2 days for that. I mean,
I like the
It's
idea
pretty
of
easy.
the IG owning it and flushing that out.
Yeah, and we talked
Yeah.
about this time thing last night because that was a concern on my end, which was
Yeah.
part of our like sort of push and pull here of like, are we really gonna, is it gonna be a year before somebody gets disciplined for something, and then like what happens in the interim? And Richard was sort of explaining, depends on the severity of things, it depends on
True.
what it is, as to how that goes. But the point being that this, generally speaking, simplifies so much of the process to, Jason's point, that a lot of those cases won't either need to be heard or, in the first place, or they'll just be super simple.
And even better, you guys shouldn't have to do a lot of hearings under this. That's the
Exactly.
whole
Right.
point. You address the problem on the front end,
Right.
you won't have to do the hearings on the back end.
I'm wondering if we know there's going to be time periods where there might not be an IG because, either they're not hired yet, they're not working yet, or they're,
You
the
mean-
IG leaves. What could it be? Should we put in here that a designated representative would step in for the IG?
right. So understanding that you guys have gone through this change in what the IG is going to be, having those 5 different departments, still don't understand that. In any case, that IG having 5 different departments, as I understood it, is supposed to have some staff working with them, and still their job is for the compilation of the numbers of what's taking place here and all of the different matters of what's going on in police reform. As far as paragraph 245 to 250 of the consent decree as to what their duties are as the IG, I believe it will be up to the city and the DOJ to come up with how they want to do that, but you guys do have input as to how you would want that, being the overseers of civilian review, overseers of police reform and civilian oversight, then I believe you guys are the last authority into what you want how you want that done. So,
I'm throwing out a suggestion of because the situation though is what it is, which is currently there's 0 people in the IG's office, and there might be 1 at one point. And so, but hopefully there will be others, but that's not the case that we're currently existing in. And ideally, like this policy actually gets passed soon, and maybe even before the IG gets put in. This might be going too far, but a representative from the CPC would fill in for the IG.
they could. It's up to the CPC. That's the beauty of this.
And that,
guys have the authority
because
to do that.
I was sort of thinking of who else, I was sort of thinking like who else would it be? Sometimes I sort of feel, like maybe the monitor could step in here, as sort of a neutral, but yeah, they
They
wouldn't.
won't be
They
around.
They wouldn't.
you know.
Well, no, I know, and I understand, it's not yep, they're here for now, but, something, oh, and then, but also there's, yeah, the issue of like, they're kind of, well, and we didn't really get into the consensus topic, but, like vote versus consensus, I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing though, with the makeup, your point being like, if all 3 officers vote in a block, that's something to sort of consider. You know, and then the IG or whoever's, I guess, in charge, but hopefully would be the IG would sort of investigate that, not investigate, but kind of look into it, which is something they would otherwise already be doing in their regular duties. But anyway, I guess I was thinking about the numerical breakdown of if you don't have a 5th person there, but if it's not a vote, if it's not by like majority vote or something, it's actually consensus, then that's different. So. But
I like the idea of a CPC stand-in.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
who else would it be?
someone in oversight.
Yeah. So it's just something possible thing to fill in, and yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree. CPC, you guys are you guys are the final word. You can do that if you want, or however you'd like to do it.
I think the only thing is then, if that case came to us, that person would have to recuse themselves.
That's a possibility,
But
yes.
no, that's not the end of the world, there's 13 commissioners, so.
Would they have to?
They probably should. They probably should, yeah.
There's just not a lot of ways under this a case can come to.
I know.
There just isn't,
But,
like.
I know, I'm just trying to think,
And that's the brilliance of it, like, when the going to an equal model, which is what Richard has pushed for years, takes away that to the point where you just don't have a lot of reasons. They're not gonna win their arbitrations a lot either, you know,
So,
it's just.
and I just want to reiterate, it's not just Richard who was thinking about
No,
the
it
equals,
was you're
because
the champion of
the
it, Richard, let's
officers
be real.
collectively, for years, for decades, have been begging for something that's equal. And I understand everyone wants to go with the equitable model, but what's equitable for you is not equitable for me, and that's not fair. So yeah, everyone's been wanting something equal, and I'm glad that you guys are at least listening to this now.
But you do deserve credit. You've been the champion of this since it started, and when we put this work group together.
Well,
So
thank
you
you.
have
Yeah.
fought the hardest and the longest out of all the officers to
Well.
actually make it happen, Richard. So
Hasn't happened yet.
congratulations.
Hopefully soon. So one thing, well, if we want to keep going about the committee, then I'll save my comment, but are we, okay. I wanted to make sure that I address some of the comments specifically that you had written, or somebody had written, actually. Most of these say that when they're, I don't know. Anyway, there was something on the, the internal, what do we call it in ours? Well, I'm sort of on two, I'm looking at the CDP's thing, but
The one that the CPC came up with?
no, I'm looking at in between,
I'm sorry,
Did you ask, what you needed to ask?
about that one thing, yeah, no, we're good.
okay, so like in the current version, it's page 7, non-disciplined violations. In CDP's, they called it non-disciplined minor infractions. And then it says, as defined in GPO 10705, internal complaints of misconduct. So I just wanted to mention on that just to make a note, which is that that policy, the minor infraction policy, would just have to be amended to make room for this, which is doable. It's not like the whole, I looked at that GPO, it's not, the whole GPO isn't internal complaints of misconduct, that's a part of it, so it wouldn't be rescinding that GPO, but it would be amending it to kind of make space for this here, in the way that it's defined in non-disciplined violations. And something I also just kind of wanted to point out was like, we counted up the number of violations that are listed in each of these groups. We wrote the number down somewhere for each group, but there's just like it's like double, quadruple, triple, quadruple, like the number in CDP's draft, and we really tried to like refine it to things that kind of made the most amount of sense. I know that was one of the areas that had the biggest kind of questions for you guys, though, was going through why is this in this section, why, whatever, and different questions. We tried to incorporate in this the answers to some of not the why, but the exactly what is supposed to be in each section. But if you have questions on that, I think that could also be a good use of time, or whatever else you guys got.
Just to piggyback on that, I was looking up the number. In their group 3, they have 30 violations. We have 15. Yes.
So there's one that I'm not seeing in here, which was the improper moving of somebody in your custody. So I was curious where you would want to put that. I can't remember what the language was that they used, but it was like,
Improper moving in what, section 3? In
Prisoners, improper, so, here,
In their group, it might be in multiple groups, but I know in their group 1, which, yeah, you've got, so that's page 7 of CDPs, it says prisoners, improper conveyance, property held or booking, and then in parentheses, unintentional, does not result in damage to or loss of property or harm to individuals. My guess is, yeah, and they repeated it in
So
2.
I'm curious where you would want to put that improper conveyance.
So the improper conveyance, that actually dealt with when we were still booking booking people at the Justice Center and booking them at the various districts. It started off, where are you on this?
prohibitive tactics that do not result in
Yeah, so it started off where you booked someone at this district knowing full well radio told you to go over here to that district because you wanted to go over there it was closer to whatever you wanted to get to or whatever. And that was improper conveyance of a prisoner from one place to another. So when the citizen, because the information came from radio, radio would say, hey, take them to District 4. And you wanted to go check on your house in the 1st district, so you took them over to the 1st district to book them because you wanted to go over there. So when radio said District 4, they now sent that information out to the public that person should be held at District 4. So when a family member would then go look for their loved ones, and they go to District 4, the person's not there. And they're like, what happened to him? And then you realize that the officer took them way over there. That's what the improper conveyance was. We don't have districts like that anymore. They don't book at the districts anymore. It's an old rule that they kept there on the books for whatever reason. If something like that were to happen right now, today, there's so many different things that they would bring for that. One would be, which is the most serious, would be like false report. If they said that the person was booked at the booked here, but instead they were booked over there, and they put that in a report, well, that's making a false report, which, as we know, would be in a group 4. That's grounds for termination.
Another thing to consider, so when we were going through this, one of the things that was really helpful was kind of being like, what's the least significant version of this thing, and what is like the most significant version, which some of it is imagination, but a lot of it is just like Richard is a library of information about like stuff that's happened. So that was helpful with like a lot of this stuff. So that's, I think, the part, and I'm hearing it right now in his answer, that's kind of like, in reality, what did that mean, and how does that actually get played out? But something I'm looking at now, I don't want to like sort of, I have no, certainly authority. So, but if so if somebody else interprets it differently, but I'm looking at in group 2 on page 8 of the current one, violation of prohibited tactics that do not result in significant injury. I mean, there are a lot of, and also to Richard's point, there are things that are not explicitly articulated that fit pretty neatly into some of these, but we, I think, put quite a bit of thought into making sure that the upper and lower end of the significance of severity of the behavior is still in the right place. And then if it's not, if there's some sort of additional specificity that's required where we feel like, another version of this, is actually quite more serious, then that's noted, in parentheses in the next higher group or whatever the case may be.
And I specifically circled that one because I don't see where that is repeated with if there is an injury. So that one ends right there, and it doesn't pick up in 3 if there's an injury. So that was one that I noted. Just, I'm sure you guys meant to do that, but there's no tactics violation. If you use a prohibited tactic and it results in an injury, that should be a 3 then, right? So,
Group 2 under group 2, you'll see it says other serious violations.
Right, but then
Right, but
if
that
there was
wouldn't
injury,
bring
it
it-
would go.
If you're
If
saying,
it's- right.
if you're saying using prohibited tactics and there's no injury, right?
Right.
So that's a 2, shouldn't it be using prohibited tactics that
With
result
injury
in
would go
injury
to
would
3.
be a 3,
Well,
We'll go to
right?
3,
It
yeah.
might, it might, or, I mean, one of the things, sorry.
What's wrong with these microphones? We gotta get them fixed.
I just think
But
it was left out, so that's
it
all.
could be, but there was another thing. I mean, sometimes though, there were things, and I'm not gonna be able to pull it to my mind right now. I don't know, Richard, if you think of one, but where we like skipped a group on purpose. You know, it was kind of like, you know what, this is not like this version in parentheses, you know, or with the further specificity is not just one more group level up. It's more than that. And we moved some of those around actually quite a bit, but but I feel like I'm not.
Yeah, I
And
I'm
mean,
looking now on-
excessive force not within policy. Probably if you have a violation of a tactic
Yeah, exactly.
that results in injury, it probably is excessive force.
Well, it's not necessarily. That's a good point.
Right.
But that's exactly what I was thinking. So it's not group 3 when, I mean, it doesn't, everything can be moved around, but it's a good point that says, you know, does not result in significant injury, but I think the idea is that if it does, then that's
But
actually more serious than group 3 maybe.
Right, but also excessive force is also about the level of escalation, like with, that would be.
well,
under
it could be,
excessive
you
force.
could violate, you could use prohibited tactics and injure someone without it being use of force,
Right.
so that's the thing,
So
like,
that, yeah.
something you do could
Right.
get another officer hurt very badly, but that doesn't mean you used force on them, so
Right.
that's why I'm saying, like, where is that? So other serious
But
violations.
you mean the thing where something could cause that? Is that what you're asking?
So violation of prohibited tactics that do not result in significant injury, right? So let's say you used a flashbang on a house when you had a colleague in the house, and you caused significant harm to that person. Well, it's not a use of force, but you did something that's a terrible violation of tactics, right? You didn't do your checks and get to that point, right? So where is that in here? So it doesn't, you only have a violation of tactics that has no injury. You
What
don't
happens
Right,
have another
exactly.
scale, right?
And then if something like that were to happen, that would be a possibility of pushing it up into the next highest thing there. Additionally, keep in mind that with all these different units that we have, so you have the use of force unit, you have the deadly force unit, you have inspection unit, you have internal affairs unit. All these different units will be investigating each one of these types of things. What you were speaking of is definitely something that not only would internal affairs and inspections both be looking at, but also the use of force team. So those things will already be covered from there, and believe me, there's more than enough here for them to be able to charge an officer to correct that behavior.
So, Richard, do you have a
Well,
viewpoint
that's my.
on- Do you have a viewpoint on adding it into another section if there is significant injury, or is your point that it's not necessary because it's kind of covered in?
No, my point is that it can definitely be added into for significant injury, or for injury, yes.
Why is there only a catch-all for 2? So the only thing, there's no catch-all for 3. There's one for
Yeah.
other serious violations in group 2. But that means if I find a serious violation under this that's not listed here, the best I could do is spec you with a group 2.
No,
So that one, I don't see a possibility in group 3 to, if it's not defined here, to charge someone with a group 3. So if I found something that wasn't specifically listed here, an officer would have a good argument that you can't spec me with group 3 because you don't have anything in there that says if it's not defined, it's a catch-all.
The following are examples of violations within each group. The violations listed are not intended to be all-inclusive.
All right.
so in many ways it's kind of duplicitous, I mean, not duplicitous, what's the word? Duplicative. Duplicative. Duplicitous. Duplicating to actually even put in,
So then in that sentence, here's where I have a concern, because I've seen the chief doing this, is discretion, who has the authority then to classify it? So that needs to be addressed in this, because right now I'm seeing the safety director say, well, you've been charged with a group 3, but I think it's really a group 1, and I'm downgrading it. They're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
So that, I would like to see how we can put some guardrails on that in here. If we're saying it's not listed, right? then we're leaving some subjectivity in there for who has authority to then make up where it goes. And I'm seeing some really crazy stretches of serious things being downgraded to ones
Right.
based on discretion.
So you actually are looking at it from the top from the worst situations going on down, and I truly believe that there's a lot here to work with. If you have 2 group 3s, that's automatically termination because they're gonna put you into
Well, I
group
saw
4.
that, that's a big
Um,
one, yeah.
So,
But I think,
hold on.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, it's different thing, but, you know, related to the group 3 stuff, so if you've answered
I
that
guess
question.
just,
The only thing is that, because we did specifically talk about this, and it might require another sentence or refining it, but basically, the idea is that,
Can you tell me where you're?
I'm looking at page 7. But it's the first sentence of the violation section. Or it's the second sentence, but that first part, right? So the violations list are not intended to be all inclusive. I do think maybe it could use a little bit of clarity, but the idea is that you cannot move something from one group into another group, but you can if this does not include something, right, which it's entirely possible, then yes, there's a moment of discretion to add to have something added. But one cannot say improper tow, which is in a group 1 violation, is just suddenly an other serious violation in a group 2, because it isn't, right? So, but I do think that, I don't know if all inclusive is enough for that, but
And that's the redundancy. I hated the
So-
redundancy. So that solves that. I agree 100% that you can't downgrade something that's not downgradable. So if I list it in all 3, I can downgrade it because it's not.
Yeah, we're not, right, we're
not
definitely trying to
doing
take
that
away from
anymore,
that. Additionally, it should be noted that what you're talking about, looking at the most egregious things, most of those really egregious things that's within the police officer's availability to do are already listed in group 3s and 4s. So those things are already covered. Now, if you're thinking about something that we haven't thought of, that hasn't been done before, has never been seen before, then of course that will be dealt with accordingly, and you reserve the right and the authority to go back and review your policy every year, and I believe you also have the right within 115 to go back and look at prior discipline.
well, you could probably get updated anytime.
So those things are always available to you, so you're looking at it from the top down. I'm actually looking at it from the bottom up, from the officer's perspective going upward. Not every officer wants officers out there committing crimes and doing all of this bad stuff. They're not like that. A good amount of them are really just out here working hard, trying to take care of their families. But at the same time, they want to be treated equally. They want to be treated just the same as that officer that's sitting next to them or across the hall from them. They don't want that person to be able to get away with stuff that they can't get away with. And likewise, they don't want to get away with stuff and that person not be able to. Yes, sir.
So
I think Pete,
Well, if you have a thing about this, I've got other questions.
I'm so sorry,
I was
sir.
just gonna comment, I think it's kind of the idea that if I can kind of summarize, the most serious violations you could possibly do, those are all more or less covered by established rules. And if you were to invent a totally new way to do something that completely violates a rule but not a specific rule, I guess if you're the first one to do it, you kind of like, well, you were the first one to manage to. We can specifically mention you could do like, a Dukes of Hazzard jump over a bridge, so I guess we gotta add that now.
Right. Yeah, so
It's-
those things are covered,
But
yes.
but it's like so yeah, that's all I was gonna say.
And those things are covered also by the
Those are
manual
covered by
rules,
manual
and
rules.
also by the Ohio Revised Code, and also by the city charter, and administrative code. So you have more than enough ways to find a violation for an officer if you need to.
So, I have a few questions. One is like going back to
Your mic's not on.
non-discipline violations.
Your
I
mic's
want-
not on.
Nobody else is using their mic either. So you had said something, we had put a reference to 1.07.05. So what was your point there? Is your preference that we keep this list, or what? I didn't quite follow what your suggestion
Hold
was.
on, so
Just
yes,
real quick.
we're asking that you keep this list and for the non-discipline violations. The reason why is because when you look at the number of cases that the department has been hearing over the years, you'll find that a large number of them come under this Group A and of course Group B for Group 1 violations. But the problem is that under the prior matrix, they were getting an exorbitant amount of days.
Right, right.
And
Okay.
it just wasn't working to correct
So you want to
that behavior.
specify as much as possible there with
Right.
this list. Okay.
If you notice here, like for tardiness, we put 1 to 3 offenses per quarter. You
Right.
gotta realize that people are raising
Irregular.
families, sometimes they just can't get there, and they need about 5 or additional 5 or
Right.
10 minutes. You don't want a sergeant trying to put somebody up on charges because they had to take their kid to school or
Yeah.
to the,
Okay,
to the
that's good.
thing. It's ridiculous.
Another question, Group 3. So I'm trying to, and again, this may be a dumb question, but I see you've highlighted firearms violations resulting in death or serious injury, and I'm wondering why is engaging in sexual activities while on duty worse than a firearms violation that results in death or injury? For
Yeah.
example.
Wait, worse?
Well, I mean,
that's
it's
later.
Group 3 versus Group
Yeah.
4. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think death is kind of worse than sex, frankly, my experience.
Depends on
Or
the sex.
actually, it's the other way around.
Hopefully.
Well, with one, you clearly have a morality issue going on
Right.
there, which violates the, as you can see, the gross immorality and as well as the Civil Service Commission rules. The issue with the firearms violation resulting in death or serious injury. So we were kicking this around because we're trying to figure out which situations they actually come under. Now, in my experience, I remember in the districts, some people and in the locker rooms, they're putting their guns in the thing. Now, if you notice, a police officer's gun has to be loaded at all times. You just pull the trigger and it goes. And sometimes they're putting their stuff in the locker and they had their finger on the trigger or something caught in the thing and a round went off in the district. And it might have gone through a wall or something like that. There really wasn't an intention behind that to do that thing. It was carelessness. Another situation I'm really familiar.
Negligent, you'd have
But
to
it
put
results in
negligent in
death.
there then.
Well, that's a possibility, but that's not all of the situation
I
here.
heard what he said.
He says you have to use the word negligently to for that
Qualify
specific
it.
situation, right?
Well, we said carrot in the prior so. I think
Well, you unintended careless.
Yeah.
So I just want to, part of the reason that we were having a hard time with this was, initially, the unattended careless handling of firearms, which is a little bit, well, anyway, it was in a Group 3 violation, like, with firearms violations resulting in death or serious injury, which was like, that didn't make sense. So that's why we split them, but didn't 100%, know what to do with them. But that was part of that. And there was another thought. Violation resulting in serious death. Did we?
So,
Yeah.
So there's a good chance with this though, if you actually, regardless of your mental status, if you knowingly did it or negligently did it, if the prosecutor wanted to charge you, then you're looking at a 4 anyway. So if you had a negligent firearm discharge at work and it killed your colleague, chances are you're going to get involuntary manslaughter.
That's a good point.
So you're going to get involuntary manslaughter, which is going to put you in 4 because then you have a felony.
Of course.
And
So it's taken care of. But in cases where it isn't, where no one is hurt, where no one did die rather,
maybe we should take death
probably
off.
take death out of there.
Yeah. Resulting
It's
in
going to-
injury.
Yeah, injury. So in cases of injury, I do remember this. At the range, they actually take your bullets away from your gun. You actually, before you step off, they end up having to change the process so that before you come off the range, you had to submit all of your rounds into the canister. Because officers were going back into the shed to clean their weapons, and some of them still had rounds in their gun. And I do remember one officer who shot himself in the hand. In there and the round went off, and there were a couple people where you're on the range and they're supposed to be holstered and somebody's going down range to look at their thing and they get a round off. These are firearms violations that have to be corrected.
Yeah. I suggest that we just take death out there.
Yeah.
Result in injury.
I mean, right. This was the other thought. This is one of the big ones where we were going through like most seriously serious thing. So like, and in practical examples, like, but even, you know, shooting into an area with a bunch of people, or somebody, like or shooting at somebody and there's somebody far away, like, who gets shot, or sort of different instances like that, that just also, I think, are important to, consider. I'm sorry, it's getting a little bit late, and
Yeah,
there was another thought I was having, but.
I need to go too, so.
Yeah, it wasn't that, it was that I lost my train
I
of thought.
do have a question.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Which may not be answerable, but thank you for that conversation. And I'm sort of, I mean, it just occurred to me as we were talking through this, and death and firearms, and thinking of, and this is probably not really appropriate here, but I can't help but ask. Maybe it's willful, gross neglect of duty, but where would Timothy Loman be in this?
Who?
Timothy Loman, who killed Tamir Rice.
Good question.
Where is he? They violated training and policy, so maybe is it willful and gross neglect? Is it, I don't know, excessive physical, that's not really physical force, use of force?
So the issue, so there's a thing every year that officers have to go through called Chapter 10. Chapter 10 deals with the use of force, use of deadly force with the weapon. And so you have to show your proficiency in that. There are things about shooting where there's background, there are things about when you can draw and holster your weapon and so on and so forth. At that time, the Chapter 10 that was available did give him the right to unholster his weapon and point his weapon because he didn't have all of the information, which is, it's definitely unfortunate, but the Chapter 10 that they had at that time wasn't a firearms violation because it said that if you're going to call someone with a weapon, a firearm, which is what he was told at the time, he had the right to unholster his weapon and point his weapon. Whether or not he could have taken a half second before he fired, that's all another matter for the courts and everyone else to adjudicate. That's not what I'm here to adjudicate, but I am saying that at that time, the written policy as it was allowed him to unholster his weapon and point.
So is that changed now? Is that different?
So you may want to take some time to go over your manual rules, your 2024 draft, where you may find Chapter 10 located in there.
Okay.
That may go over what the current policies are or what they're advocating the current policies to be.
All right.
So, two things. One is just because it kind of came up here. Gross neglect of duty is not, it's not defined like anywhere that I can find. And I mean, it is on the internet in different places.
It's a Cleveland municipal ordinance, actually, I think.
I don't think it is.
It's
Oh,
they call it dereliction.
Dereliction is
of
different
duty.
though, right? We talked about that.
It's a crime. It's in the ORC.
Yeah. So this is gross neglect of duty, which we could, it's in everybody's draft, like it's it's everywhere, but you know, it's actually quite hard to find like what actually that is. So when we were I realized that because there were a couple of these that were just like, yeah, like I had a problem with saying other serious violations before we had a conversation about it, and I was like, how can you just have a catch-all like that? Same with gross neglect of duty. Seems like these things are right for discretion. So I added the word willful in there because it helped. It really is actually defining what, like, in the dictionary, gross neglect of duty seems to indicate, but I think it helps to have that extra word in there instead of like putting a definition in there that just it's willful gross neglect of duty. It's a little bit not duplicitous, but duplicative, but that was that. The other thing I just want to say is that like if you're going back, you know, doing comparisons, which certainly should, between the, you know, CDP's recommendations and this current thing we got, I just would basically recommend that, and I don't know what how we want to go about this moving forward. I don't know what your plans are moving forward for all of this. It's not exactly, you know, our business, but I think that if you have questions about stuff that is added or removed, that to ask Richard, because we went through this whole thing. We went through, you know, this whole thing. I'm pointing at the CDP policy. I'm pointing at the 2020 policy. Obviously, we've gone through then the current draft, but there are actual answers to every single question. So I just, so if there is something that comes up, like, I mean, I'm not gonna say don't hesitate to ask, because I don't know what the format is for asking, and it's probably not just like randomly sending questions, but I'm just saying that, like, there's almost certainly an explanation for whatever that might be. Whether or not you agree is different, but,
Exactly, and I want to clear something up. I asked Kayla to be the communicator with this because my job is so demanding that sometimes I really don't even get a chance to look at my phone for hours and hours and hours. And anybody who may have tried to call me will attest to that I just haven't been able to answer the phone. Because once I get into the office, I am basically locked down busy until I can get out at 6 p.m. Sometimes I might get a break at 4 o'clock and take
That's not retirement, Richard.
No, I
Just
know.
So you know.
I know it's
I
not.
don't know if anyone told you that, but I'm just wondering.
I thought working at a law firm would be retirement, but it's not. It really isn't. So in any case, with that, I do want to thank you for your time. I hope that I've answered your questions, and if you have any further questions, please just submit them. I'm not trying to say that I don't want to talk to you guys. I'm trying to say that I'm respectful of your time, and if you do reach out to me, I don't want it to seem as though I'm not trying to talk to you. But I know that I've been able to see that Kayla has found a way to manage her time to where she can be able to get a hold of things and so on and so forth. And she understands that I'm not always available until after 6. And I know you guys are busy with your lives after that. So, again, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Richard.
This was really helpful, and I see that you guys put a lot of hours